This is my theory of knowledge presentation on communication and language. So I got this text message from a friend the other day, and I don't understand what she was trying to say. It seems like it was English at first, but then I realized it was a whole new combination of letters, symbols, and numbers that I was probably supposed to derive meaning from, but had no idea how to. This was like Sanskrit to me. It was like a long-lost language that someone had dug up and expected me to understand. And I wondered how this crime against grammar even came about. It seems like she was just trying to spite every third grade teacher that told us grammar and phonics were the most important parts of our life, and was trying to convey her ideas without using any of the techniques we had learned. And I wondered why this was necessary. If we were given the tools to talk efficiently, then why not use them? Because whenever I receive a text message that just seems like more numbers and symbols than actual words, I sit there wondering what I just read. I didn't know if there was something lost in translation, if there was some new acronym or abbreviation that I just wasn't getting, or if there was some meaning that I just can't pick up on because I'm not up to date with all the lingo. But since it takes me this long to try to even think about what I've read, I wonder why language has changed to be this ridiculous. Grammar is going extinct, and all of the conventions that we had grown up knowing were important are suddenly becoming obsolete, and no one wants to use them anymore. But this made me think that even if I didn't think it was acceptable, maybe someone else did, and I didn't know who had the authority to decide what forms of communication were acceptable and which are not. Because some groups of people might find this convenient and acceptable, while I just find it ridiculous and a crime against grammar. Furthermore, how has sensory perception, emotion, and reason changed the ways that society communicates and interprets language? This first example, there are two sets of text messages. The one on the left uses a new lingo, while the one on the right uses conventional grammar. They say the same thing, but elicit different responses based on the fact that one kind of communication, the one on the right, is taken more seriously than the other. The one on the left just kind of seems like it's putting the ideas out there, but not putting enough thought into it to have them really mean anything. So basically, because they won't write them out, the person responding, most likely a parent or an older figure, doesn't take it as seriously. Whereas the one on the right, they spell it all out, they put their feelings clearly and concisely out there in order to gain that response. Since the messages technically describe the same teenage drama, they should have produced the same response. These differences in perception led to the question of whether or not what is said is overshadowed by how it is said. Unfortunately, this new wave of internet lingo is a crime against rational reasoning, since we are always taught that the point of language is to convey ideas clearly and concisely in an organized manner. Unfortunately, with these new internet memes, that idea is put to pasture, since wherever these go, grammar seems to die. It would actually be uncommon for one of these memes to have proper grammar, simply because it is not part of the repertoire of these memes. A prime example of this are the new Doge memes. The text around the dog, it represents inner monologue. As a dog, it obviously has no knowledge of the conventions of the English language, and therefore will not be able to convey any of their thoughts grammatically and correctly. So let's read these. So theory of knowledge, many IB graders impress, much ways of knowing, very knowledge question, how impress, much humanities, wow. For one group, this makes absolutely no sense and produces no response other than confusion and wondering why this dog looks so awkward. For the other group, this Doge meme is hilarious. The difference is one group tries to use reason on this to deduce meaning, which will ultimately be ineffective since it uses no grammar or other conventional structures. The other group sets aside conventional language expectations and is able to understand the meme for what it is. They understand that it's an inner monologue of a dog describing IB, and quite possibly this project. Furthermore, it should be questioned if reasoning is even necessary when interpreting and understanding language, because in this case it absolutely was not. The group that was able to understand only understood by removing these conventions that they had had placed in their mind before in order to derive meaning and find it funny, whereas the other group that could not let go of these conventions could not find it funny and probably will never understand it. Another way to see this issue is in the presence of different languages. Each person on this earth is equipped to deal with their own language and is only able to perceive things based on what they understand if it's in their tongue. Even though people that can be multilingual can understand many languages, they're still confined by what they could or could not perceive. A prime example of this is in this list. Each of the phrases shown say the same thing, I love you, but they're written in English, Spanish, French, Russian, German, and Swahili. The person that only speaks English will only be able to perceive any meaning from the first line that just says it in English, I love you. Whereas if they read the line in Swahili, they would have no idea what it said and wouldn't be able to derive any meaning. The same goes for someone that can speak Swahili but can't speak English. They would only be able to perceive any meaning from the bottom line and would perceive none from the top line. But regardless, they all mean the same thing. So if language relied purely on reason and rationale, then each person would be able to feel the same and know what it meant when they looked at it, even though it's not their language. However, they each have to perceive it in order to understand it. It's not just about reading it and deriving any meaning. The way each individual perceives the phrase "I love you" relies on the fact that each person can only perceive language in a certain way. In this case, they can only perceive the language that they understand. And just because one person can't understand English doesn't mean that another does not. So basically, just because one group doesn't understand texting lingo does not mean that another group shouldn't use it. If that group can understand it and can communicate efficiently, then it should be accepted. That would be the same as saying someone that doesn't speak Swahili says Swahili should not be a legitimate language just because they cannot perceive any meaning from it. A spin-off of nearly any recognized language is unrecognizable slang. So let's take this comic for a second. One person is speaking to his colleague using British slang, which I don't even understand because I'm from the United States, and his colleague appears completely confused and lacks any understanding of what was trying to be said. Before we go any further with this example, let's define slang. Slang is a type of language that consists of words and phrases that are regarded as very informal, are more common in speech than in writing, and are typically restricted to a particular context or group of people. But wait, did they just say that slang was a type of language? Knowledge question alert. Is ridiculous slang just natural evolution of language? Because if slang was the derivation of another language, then that just means that it stems off, just as English had stemmed off from Latin. So would that make English the original slang? It seems like any language could start out as slang, but until a group uses it and the society accepts it more often, then it's just considered slang until it's considered language. Take English, Spanish, and Italian, all coming from Latin, for example. Alright, the paragraph shown utilizes many slang terms and phrases that have popped up over the last couple of years, so let's read this. That ratchet is cray. She won't turn down for anything. Illy-a-milly, though. You're a chiller and have swag to the max. For the majority of people, this means absolutely nothing because you'd have to define ratchet, cray, turn down, illy-a-milly, chiller, and what having swag to the max even would mean. So for the majority, this means nothing. But to the generation that basically created this slang, they would easily know that this just means that trashy girl is crazy. She never stops partying. I love you, though. You're very cool and relaxed and have so much charisma. They are the same in the sense that they have the ability to be understood in the same way. However, some would argue that slang is unnecessary because it lacks the sophistication and merit that the normal conventional English has, just because one sounds more official than the other. But should communication be tied down by standards beyond comprehension? Because language itself is purposed in order to convey ideas clearly to other people. The definition of what is clear or not is open to interpretation. What one person may describe as clear and concise, another might think is clouded and they have no idea what it means. In this case, the group that can understand the slang should be able to use it to communicate because they can still comprehend what the other person is saying. And also, who would ethically even have the right to decide what those language standards are? Since society is so fluid and constantly changing, then why would it be right for one person to decide what standards of language was the best or most ideal, when they have groups below them that are coming up in the age groups that are deciding that slang terms are becoming the new norm, it's becoming the new thing. Language has not stayed the same from year to year even. New words and phrases pop up constantly and even are added to the dictionary. So one person deciding what the standards of language are. Language is also credited with the catalyzing of various emotional responses. Take this quote from J.K. Rowling's final Harry Potter novel, stating that words are a most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it. If words have the power to elicit this strong of an emotional response, then why should any kind of language be prevented from also gaining this power? This would be like telling Shakespeare that he can't coin new words simply because no one has heard of them yet. That's how new words come into being. One person thinks that they're legitimate, they're laughed at, most likely for a while, until a group decides that, hey, this is a great way to communicate and let's use this. And most of those phrases that Shakespeare's coined have become commonplace language today. So, this evolution of language can be considered in the same way. It might seem ridiculous now, but later on, it might not, and it'll still be able to have the capability to hold these emotional powers that any other word that we can give or think of now could. So why would it matter what kind of language is used if the words still held meaning to the listener? Basically, why would it matter if someone's using texting lingo if the receiving person understands what it means and is still able to hold that emotional response, that would be the same as using conventional English. Conventional English is not a way, like a surefire way, of producing an emotional response. Neither is texting lingo. So, tying it all together, conventional language is constantly subject to evolution and manipulation at the hands of a fluid society. As long as society remains changing and fluid, then language must keep up with the demand. Though language at times can seem ridiculous, like in text or internet lingo, it is merely embracing new dialects on the digital frontier. It is common to find different dialects throughout the country, whether you're in the Midwest, the South, the Northeast, SoCal, like I am, saying like every couple of minutes. It's every single place has their own dialect, and just embracing a new dialect on the digital frontier is one more way of expressing language in a different community. How this type and all types of language are perceived relies solely on the group that is listening. So if one group that's listening to texting dialogue has no familiarity with it, they have no idea what it means, they're obviously not going to derive any meaning, and they're not going to perceive anything from it, just as someone that's listening to a song in another language can't understand the lyrics. But as long as there's a group that can communicate with each other using this dialect, then that makes it legitimate. Language can transcend reason and rational conventions and still manage to convey meaning through the communication from one person to another. Emotion and individual perceptions make these dialogues acceptable and interpretable. If people were not able to perceive anything that was being said through texting lingo, then it would have died out. But since it hasn't and it's getting more of a following, then it should be considered a legitimate way of communication because people rely on perception to derive meaning from language. If they can perceive what is being said through texting lingo and have some sort of emotional tie or response to what is being said, then it should be considered just as legitimate as speaking in normal English language. Though this dialect of language seems utterly ridiculous at times, society has merely adopted a new facet of communication, with perception and emotion outweighing reason and rational conventions for the sake of societal communication and interaction.